Welcome to Security Scan. I am Uday Bhaskar. As the curtain falls on 2016, we review the Indian Fauj in the course of the year. The Indian military is an institution that is widely respected both within the country and outside for its professionalism and apolitical nature. The principle of civilian political control is an article of faith in India and appropriately internalized by the military. Each of the three armed forces, the Army, Navy and Air Force, have done the country proud in war, internal security duties and peace. The Fauji has shed life and blood in defense of flag and nation, and the vigil continues 24/7, 365 days a year. 2016 has had its share of highs and lows, and each service has a distinctive trajectory, a narrative. Where omissions have occurred, it is expected that rigorous professional review has been undertaken and appropriate correctives applied. To place each of the services, Army, Navy and Air Force in appropriate context, we have an eminent panel. As always, Lieutenant General P.K. Singh, Director of the USI, Vice Admiral Pradeep Kaushiva, a former Commandant of the National Defence College, and Air Marshal Ramesh, former AOC-in-C of the Training Command. Welcome, gentlemen. Can I turn to you first, General P.K.? In the perception of the common man, when we talk about the Indian Army and 2016, I would say the recall is Pathankot in January, Nagrota towards the end of the year, the surgical strike. But these are only, I would say, the more visible aspects. So could you help our viewers to understand Indian Army in 2016?
Thank you, Uday. 2016 saw India exhibiting more assertiveness in defending our interests and thinking out of the box in dealing with challenges both internally and those created by some of our neighbors. The dynamics of the China-Pakistan nexus, Pakistan's sponsoring of terrorism within our country, the growing Chinese footprints in our neighborhood, and of course the military capabilities of China all have a bearing on our security. Internally, the valley witnessed an agitation unprecedented in recent times, both in violence and in the long duration, with almost doubling of infiltration efforts and increase in terrorist attacks, including on military installations. And you mentioned Pathankot, Uri and Nagrota. The surgical strikes were preemptive action within the bounds of international law and gave a clear message that it will no more be business as usual. We were not going to make concessions to buy peace. 2016 also saw the government's resolve to push through the DPP and also to...
That is the defense procurement processes.
Correct. Yeah. And also to restructure the armed forces by ordering a study headed by Lieutenant General Shekatkar. The army continued to carry on its raisings, and it, as many would be aware, we raised another BrahMos regiment, a Pinaka regiment, and a Smirch regiment. AD equipment was modernized.
AD as in Air Defense Artillery.
Air Defense Artillery equipment was modernized. And we also built up integrated weapon systems on our ALH, Advanced Light Helicopter.
So would it be fair to say that in your assessment, on balance, it's been a satisfactory year for the Indian Army?
Yes, just a word about the attacks on Pathankot, Uri and Nagrota. There were a lot of suggestions that we should have more walls, we should get into a fortress mentality. The army does not subscribe to the concept of a fortress mentality. We are the armed forces of the nation.
So and meet the adversary outside.
Meet him outside and not
I'll request you to hold that thought. Can I turn to you, Admiral Kaushiva? When we talk about the Navy, again, I'm talking about the perception from the outside. We had the International Fleet Review in February, which was a major feather in the cap for India. But then we also had the ignominy of Betwa, a warship falling in a dry dock. So how would you look at the Navy in 2016?
Navy in 2016 had a mixed experience, and I'll just take these two examples which you have cited, because these form at two different ends of the spectrum of our experiences. So I'll start with the negative one in the first instance, so that we put that behind and look at the positive thereafter. Betwa was extraordinary experience on 5th of December when a warship after maintenance in a dry dock of her underwater hull, when being floated, she fell off on the side. In 40 years of experience, I must have stood on the decks of at least 20 if not more ships during docking and undocking. It is a very precision controlled maneuver, but a thought that the ship can fall over the side never ever occurred. Probably it is unprecedented, besides of course being unfortunate for the loss of life, equipment damages. This was one end of the spectrum. It's being looked into by a very senior, experienced, technologically competent inquiry, and I'm quite sure the results will come out. But even at this preliminary stage, one thing is certain, in my own mind at least, and that is it was certainly not act of God. What exactly it was, what happened?
I think we'll leave it at that and go to the positive side on the IFR.
Everything else is positive in that the Indian Navy hosted International Fleet Review on 6th of February, wherein 50 nations participated, some 90 ships, 40 aircraft from 50 countries participated in that review, and a Supreme Commander of Indian Armed Forces, the President of India, Shri Pranab Mukherjee, reviewed the gathering of international fleets and took the salutes. That was a spectacular event which showcased India's place amongst the maritime powers of today as a reckonable power. It was a precision activity, it was exquisite planning, and absolutely an exceptionally fail-proof, foolproof, and well-executed maneuver.
I'll come back to
All
you.
other experiences were in between, which...
Yeah, I'll come back to you particularly about the submarines and the platform deficiencies in the Navy. But Air Marshal Rai, if I may turn to you, as far as the Air Force is concerned, I think some of the high visibility issues were, for instance, when Defence Minister Mr. Parikar had announced the Rafale deal and suggesting that there has been a steady induction of major platforms. How would you assess the Air Force in 2016?
I would begin by saying that the Indian Air Force continues to maintain its professionalism, its quality, and the quality of its training towards discharge of its duty for the nation, that is to defend the skies of this country. And this has been acknowledged not only within the country but also outside, when the Indian Air Force goes under exercises with the United States or other countries like UK or France. Insofar as the structure in terms of number of squadrons is concerned, the Air Force is presently at its nadir probably, because we are only at 33 squadrons, which is 6.5 squadrons less than the authorized figure of 39.5. And it is to make up for these that the country has gone in for the Rafale, which was announced as early as the September of this year. While we require 39.5 squadrons, but in another 10 years time from now, the threat around us would have built so much, especially since we think of fighting a two-way war or a two-front war, that we would have to go from 39.5 to 45 squadrons, which is the desire of the Air Force to reach that figure by 2027. Towards that end, we have to see what the path the Air Force and the country will follow. Rafale is just a beginning. The other induction that took place is the LCA, when we got 2 aircraft in July this year. So is it going to be
The
Rafale
LCA
and
is a light combat aircraft that is being built in India, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is being built in India by HAL and has been inducted in July this year. So is the forward trajectory going to be Rafale and LCA? Will that be sufficient? Because we have bought only 36 Rafales against a requirement of 126. So there is a deficiency of 90 aircraft. How is the country going to make up for these 90 aeroplanes is something that we need to ponder on.
And also I'll come back to you later to ask whether the country can afford 45 fighter squadrons, but that's a later sort of issue. General PK, let me come back to you. As far as the army is concerned, now this is a recent development. You know, there's been a lot of reference to the morale of the army in particular, the military in general. There are various issues including OROP, etc. But I do want to flag this question of the selection of the chief, because it has been discussed in the national media extensively. 2 points here. One is the principle of seniority, and I'm not asking you to make any value judgment on individuals, but a generic issue. The second is the feeling you're a gunner, you've been an army commander, but it appears that today within the army, there seems to be a sense of disquiet about discrimination against the armor, the armored corps officers, the cavalry, and that the infantry seems to have got. Now, can you just place that in perspective for us?
On both the issues, firstly, as far as the issue of the prerogative of selection of the chief by the government, I think that's absolutely clear. As a matter of fact, let's look around to the promotion boards. In the promotion boards that I sat through as an army commander, we do look around, we do pass over people. They're very competent because of the pyramidical status. So supersession in the army has been going on. It will carry on. Secondly, I think the chiefs have the prerogative of picking up their own officers to place them in army headquarters or in different commanders. So if the chiefs have the prerogative, the government also has the prerogative of picking up the chiefs. So I think that prerogative, we should not question the prerogative. By these debates, we only sort of flag issues which need not be flagged. There is a
fair
person.
enough. So we
That is one
accept
issue.
civilian political control. What about this question of the cavalry versus the gunners and, you know?
This debate carries on internally, and it has been carrying on from the time we became independent, carries on in all countries all over the world. But has it really brought down the performance or the capabilities of the services a notch below? I don't think so. And I think we should not read too much into supersession of a person from one particular arm or the other. However, it needs to be said that we need to have systems put in place that give fair chance to all. Because when we commission officers, we send them from the good and then all across to all the arms and services. So there is an aspiration of all that there is a need for us to be, the door should be open for us to go up. And I think if there's a perception, then it needs to be looked into and set right.
Well, I hope the Indian Army is listening to what you're saying. But Admiral Kaushiva, can I come to you? Now, the Navy over the last few years, we've had a rather, again, I would say, anomalous development where a service chief, in this case Admiral D.K. Joshi, had resigned. And this draws attention to what I would call as a less than satisfactory civil-military relationship. Now, Navy in particular and the military in general, you've been a former commandant of the National Defence College, where I dare say these issues would have come up. How would you frame the status of civil-military relations and this whole question of the chiefs and the political apex in the country?
There are two separate issues I would like to flag in this question itself. One is the civil-military relationship which you have asked for, and I'll have no hesitation answering that first. And that is civil-military relationship is based on political control of Indian armed forces. Political control is not administrative control by the bureaucracy. In actual fact, allocation of business rules and transaction of business rules of 1961 have created an imbalance in the structure of national security, in that they have given responsibility for defense of India and all parts thereof to Defense Secretary. Defense Secretary has no knowledge, has no experience of any combat, has no training for it, has no skill. He is an administrative head of a secretariat. On the other hand, armed forces command and control is vested in the chiefs through respective acts of the services. And therefore, there is a distinct anomaly. This plays out in real life, wherein sanctions sought by armed forces get actually not either delayed or they get bowled out by the bureaucracy and not political leadership having adequate time to take a look at it. In this, I must flag specifically, say Navy's induction plans, they take anything between 5 at very few, but more than 10 to 15 years from cold start to a unit being commissioned. Now, if there is lead time is 10 to 15 years for most of them, there is need for a commitment to be made for the Navy to decide what it wants, with what specifications, for political leadership to give the sanction, and then commit funds till it is actually commissioned. Now, we don't have that commitment of funds which goes on from year to year, and that is how imbalance comes in. Now, Admiral Joshi's resignation did not come on account of politico-military relationship in the first sense which you are asking. It was on account of the second one. And that was one example where was an extreme example for everybody to see and learn lessons from. I'm not sure we've learned it, but some has possibly been taken through. But that was because the sanctions sought over a period of time for maintenance, for inductions, for upgradations, for renewals, etc., have not been coming. Where is the responsibility for that? If the administrative responsibility, if it's the bureaucracy, then somebody needs to be held accountable there. But for want of that, as professional head of the armed forces, Admiral D.K. Joshi, in the best tradition of the service, took that responsibility and put in his papers. And
I'll come to this a little later again and ask all three of you. For instance, there is talk about the appointment of a CDS, whether that would make a difference. But Ramesh, Marshal Rai, if I can get back to you. Now, one of the issues that is constantly raised is this question of jointness. And let me say this as candidly, if I may, that the Air Force is dragging its feet and that it is not really supportive of the principle of jointness. We've had a number of very senior retired military personnel referring to this aspect. So in terms of the way ahead, when I said, can the Indian state afford 45 fighter squadrons, as you have indicated, is jointness the way out? What are your thoughts on that?
Firstly, I want to differ with you and give my own comprehension of the fact that the Air Force is very much for jointness.
Oh, cheers. That's a good point. Air Force is for jointness.
And I was the chief instructor in the Defence Services Staff College, and that is the place where jointness sort of emerges or is festered into our service, and it is well ingrained in all the three services that jointness is the way, or joint warfare is the way to fight the next war. So the Air Force is very much for it. Insofar as 45 squadrons is concerned, I don't think it's a luxury, it's something which is essential. For in the year 2027, if you see the inductions across the border, the Chinese have around 1,500 aeroplanes now, and though out of these 1,500, at least about 800 are of the fourth generation, 4.5 or fifth generation will be when the J-31 comes in. And likewise on in the side of Pakistan, they will have about 400. So in a two-front situation, even if the Chinese were to field around 600 and the Pakistanis around 200, we would have to face 800 aircraft, for which we would need at least 1,000 aircraft on our side, which means about 45 squadrons.
So you see this as an imperative?
As an imperative.
The country has to find the resources.
We have to find the resources. Just one more thing to say, that in this scenario, we have to be, with respect of our adversaries, either better in numbers or better in technology.
Fair enough. Please, you want to come in?
I want to say something. You raised the issue about morale. I think there are two issues which people should understand. Morale brought up by being in the army, by being in your regiments, by being together. That morale stays high, and that's why you find everybody leading from the front and doing anything for the country. The second issue is morale, which is impacted by what is done by governments. We are looking for our pride, our izzat, and somehow we get a feeling that that is being hit by the government and the bureaucracy, and that lowers morale. The morale or the support that we need from our countrymen. We understand that our countrymen support us, but there is a disconnect between the support from the perceived support from the government and the bureaucracy or the civil administration towards the izzat of the army. It's not anything else.
Can I take that to you, Admiral Kaushiva, the izzat or the forge? Now, this is something that has been doing the rounds for a long time, and I think Rajya Sabha TV is a good forum perhaps to bring this out into the appropriate, I would say, frame of transparency, that over the last few years, for a variety of reasons, there seems to be a sense that this izzat is being sullied. How would you react?
I will completely share that sentiment that is being sullied over a period of time, particularly since in 1973. Year 2016 was actually very significant. We have seen the entire lot of OROP having been sanctioned prior to that, but when it was actually being disbursed, there have been dissatisfaction from it. Anomalies of 7th Pay Commission. 7th Pay Commission has created disparities which did not exist earlier, and has actually 5th and 6th Pay Commission's disparities or anomalies have also not been sorted out. Non-functional upgradations which had been given to the civilian counterparts by the 6th Pay Commission have not been given to the armed forces. Now, armed forces are made to feel through allocation of business rules, transaction of business rules, that they are outside the government, through these OROPs and NFUs, not granting of NFUs and lowering of their relativity vis-a-vis the civilian counterparts. they are made to feel that they are not quite on par with the rest of the governance structure of the nation. No, this is not possible. From Kaushiva's times, armed forces have been kept in direct contact with the political leadership. In our country, the layer of bureaucracy has crept in between the political leadership and defense management. Now, this obviously is the first and foremost reason for lowering of morale, which then becomes a political football between different political parties, with some justification in that, because let's see, surgical strike was a military operation. This was not something about which political parties of different hues and across the spectrum, all of them try to take credit or discredit somebody else. So when service conditions and military operations of a nation become issues of political debates, I'm afraid we are asking for.
We'll come back to this, but Air Marshal Rai, a quick sort of comment from you, because you referred to the LCA. How is India doing in terms of indigenization? Can you give us a quick response on that for aircraft?
So I want to say we're not doing very well. The LCA has come to the Indian Air Force after 33 years of work on the LCA, and in its present configuration, it's still not quite up to the mark. Consider the fact that in 2016 we are inducting the LCA, which is not nearing 4th generation, whereas Pakistan and China are inducting 4, 4.5, and they will soon induct the 5th generation aircraft.
So I'll take it at that you know, the LCA and where we are, a lot more needs to be done.
Yes.
But I'll request you to keep that thought, because I'll come back to it. We're out of time. The Indian Force or the military is facing a serious challenge. While the professionalism and commitment to flag and nation remains steadfast, the manner in which the institution is being dealt with by the national edifice merits objective and empathetic review. India has many development-related challenges, and the eradication of poverty ranks high. Hence, fiscal resources will always be in short supply. But as our discussion highlighted, material resources apart, the overall management of the Indian military and its correlation with the lattice of governance has not received the sustained attention it warrants. As has been pointed out in the past, Parliament rarely debates the issue in a constructive manner, and this is best illustrated by the metric that as much as rupees 250,000 crores and more is passed during the budget session with little or no discussion. Many of these inadequacies in India's higher defense management were identified after the Kargil War of 1999. The Vajpayee government set out in earnest to make the macro changes that were required. Yet, in a manner akin to crossing a chasm in two leaps, the rewiring of the military edifice and its locus within the maze of governance remains incomplete. The Modi government has flagged this imperative of initiating the structural changes in higher defense management that are so urgent, and it is hoped that meaningful implementation will soon begin with the urgency and resolve that is warranted. The new year will soon dawn upon us, and the Fauji reposes that faith in the democratic ethos and will discharge his or her duty in the face of adversity with honor and loyalty and in the highest traditions of the Indian military. On that note, allow me to thank my guests, General P.K. Singh, Admiral Kaushiva, and Air Marshal Rai. And thank you for watching Security Scan.